When the alert first appeared on people's phones that morning, most thought it had to be a mistake. Diane Keaton, the woman whose laugh could light up a room before a single line was spoken, gone at 79? Within minutes, timelines filled with disbelief. Jane Fonda wrote simply, "It's hard to believe." Reese Witherspoon called her just a truly original person. Goldie Hawn posted a photo from the first Wives Club set, the three of them mid-laughter, captioned with a single broken heart emoji. Steve Martin shared a memory from their early comedy days and said, "No one could do Diane like Diane." Across social media, the tone was the same, a strange mixture of grief and gratitude. Clips from Annie Hall and Something's Gotta Give played on loop, fans quoting her lines like prayers. The industry seemed to stop for a beat, taking in the fact that one of its true originals had signed off for the last time. But this wasn't just another Hollywood farewell. Diane Keaton wasn't a headline that faded by sunset. She was a rule breaker, who reshaped what it meant to be funny, feminine, and free. And as the tributes poured in, one truth became clear. Her story wasn't about how she died. It was about how vividly she lived, and how her spirit changed the script for everyone who came after. Diane Keaton came into the world as Diane Hall. On a warm January day in Los Angeles, 1946, a city already pulsing with dreams too big for its streets. Her childhood wasn't filled with Hollywood lights, but with the quiet kind of magic that comes from watching someone you love step into them. Her mother, Dorothy Hall, was a homemaker with a camera always nearby and a knack for turning the ordinary into something worth applauding. She entered local pageants, won titles like Mrs. Highland Park and later Mrs. Los Angeles, and somewhere between those crowns and curtain calls, a little girl in the audience began to dream. Years later, Diane would remember that moment vividly. The sight of her mother standing under stage lights, graceful and smiling as an audience leaned in. There she was in the theater, she recalled, and I thought, I'd like that for myself. That spark, part admiration, part curiosity, never went out. It wasn't about glamour or applause. It was about the thrill of being seen, of making people feel something real. Even as a teenager, Diane carried herself differently. While other girls followed trends, she mixed her mother's scarves with her father's old ties, already testing the boundaries of what normal looked like. She wasn't chasing fame. She was quietly building the courage to stand apart. No one guessed that the girl who once watched from the audience would soon make the whole world watch her. By the late 1960s, Diane had traded the sunlight of Los Angeles for the footlights of Broadway. The world was changing fast protests in the streets, music in the air, and a generation determined to redefine everything. Diane found herself in the middle of it, cast in the boundary-breaking musical Hair, a show famous for its rebellion, its energy, and, famously, its nude finale. When the time came to perform that scene, Diane made a choice that would echo far beyond the stage. She refused to take her clothes off even though it meant losing a $50 bonus that at the time was no small sum for a struggling actress. It wasn't a protest or a performance, it was instinct. A quiet, steady refusal to do something that didn't feel right for her. That single decision made her stand out not for defiance's sake, but for integrity. In a business built on saying yes, Diane's no was revolutionary. It wasn't about prudishness or fear, it was about self-respect, a belief that art didn't require surrendering one's boundaries. And though she couldn't have known it then, that small act of independence, one woman holding her ground under the heat of the spotlight, would become a lifelong pattern. That same quiet defiance would later define everything she touched, from love stories to mafia sagas. In 1972, Diane Keaton stepped into a role that would forever change her life, Kay Adams, the calm center of a storm named The Godfather. Surrounded by the dark power of the Corleone family, she became the moral heartbeat of a film that defined an era. Kay wasn't a gun-wielding figure or a tragic stereotype. She was the emotional conscience of the story, torn between love and illusion, loyalty and truth. For Diane, it was her first major role on film, and she played it with such subtlety that audiences couldn't look away. Beneath the quiet eyes and soft-spoken lines, there was a strength that felt utterly real. But while The Godfather introduced her to the world, Annie Hall made her unforgettable, In 1977, she became the face and the voice of a new kind of woman in cinema. Annie was eccentric, funny, insecure, confident, tender, and unpredictable sometimes, all in the same breath. It was Diane as herself, and yet somehow larger than life, when she walked on screen in oversized vests, baggy slacks, and a floppy tie. The world saw something it hadn't seen before: authenticity as style, awkwardness as charm, imperfection as power. Her performance earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress, but it was more than just a trophy moment. Annie Hall blurred the lines between fiction and reality. The role was written around Diane, her real-life mannerisms, her humor, her way of speaking. It was a love story, yes, but also a portrait of who she was, vulnerable yet disarming, using humor as both shield and invitation. She could turn self-doubt into a punchline and loneliness into art. Diane Keaton didn't just play Annie Hall, she redefined the modern woman for an entire generation. With a smile that hid 1,000 thoughts and a laugh that could soften cynicism itself, she showed the world that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was strength wrapped in style. After Annie Hall, most actors might have stayed in that safe comedic lane, forever chasing another hit. But Diane Keaton never repeated herself. From the late 70s through the 90s, she moved like a chameleon across Hollywood's genres, testing every boundary that women in film were told not to cross. In Looking for Mr. Goodbar, 1977, she shattered her quirky image entirely. Gone was the upbeat romantic heroine. In her place was a woman exploring danger, desire, and self-destruction in a story that dared to face the darker corners of independence. It was a raw, haunting performance that proved Diane could hold a mirror to society's unease without blinking. Just 4 years later, she flipped the narrative again in Warren Beatty's Reds, a sweeping political epic that earned her another Oscar nomination. Beatty once said that Diane brought something to the film that couldn't be directed, a kind of emotional precision that came only from honesty. By the late 80s, she had reinvented herself once more, this time as the accidental mother in Baby Boom. The film struck a chord with women everywhere, portraying the chaos of balancing ambition and caretaking long before it became a buzzword. Sam Shepard, her co-star, called her fearless in the quietest way, and he was right. She didn't shout her strength. She lived it. In the 90s, Diane cemented her legend. Marvin's Room paired her with Meryl Streep in a heartbreaking story of estranged sisters and illness, earning her yet another Oscar nod. Then came The First Wives Club in 1996, a box office juggernaut that didn't just entertain, it rewrote Hollywood math. 3 women in their 50s, Keaton, Goldie Hawn, and Bette Midler, led a blockbuster about empowerment, friendship, and starting over. Diane made it feel like a movement, not a movie, Goldie once said. At a time when studios were quietly phasing out women over 40, Diane proved that charisma, talent, and truth had no expiration date. She didn't slow down. She simply changed gears. By the time the 2000s rolled around, Diane Keaton had become something rare in Hollywood, an actress who didn't just age gracefully, but made aging look exhilarating. In Something's Gotta Give, 2003, she gave audiences one of the most refreshingly human romantic performances of the decade. Paired with Jack Nicholson and Keanu Reeves, she turned a middle-aged love story into a global phenomenon. Her mix of vulnerability and wit felt effortless, like laughter born from years of experience rather than punchlines. When she laughed through tears in that now iconic scene, it wasn't acting, it was recognition. Everyone watching saw a piece of themselves in her. That role earned her another Oscar nomination and a permanent place in the hearts of moviegoers who had grown up alongside her. A few years later, the Family Stone gave her a different kind of spotlight, not the romantic lead this time, but the grounding force of a family in chaos. As the strong yet gentle matriarch, she reminded audiences that wisdom and humor could coexist in the same breath. Her later roles in Book Club and its sequel brought her full circle, a woman surrounded by laughter, friendship, and the fearless pursuit of joy at any age. Alongside Jane Fonda, Candice Bergen, and Mary Steenburgen, Diane didn't just play a character. She embodied a message that women over 60 still have stories worth telling and still know how to have a damn good time doing it. Even as she filled screens with warmth and mischief, she stayed deeply involved behind the camera. She directed Unstrung Heroes in 1995, a tender family drama that critics praised for its emotional honesty, and Hanging Up in 2000, where she balanced humor and heart in a story about sisterhood and loss. Her producing work spanned decades, right up to Maybe I Do in 2023, proving that her creative fire never dimmed, it just kept changing shape. Through every laugh line and late-career romance, Diane Keaton built a bridge between generations. Her humor matured, her confidence deepened, and her audience followed her through every season of life, not because she stayed the same, but because she never pretended to be anyone but herself. And behind the laughter, she was quietly redefining what it means to live life on your own terms. For all the decades she spent in front of cameras, Diane Keaton's private life remained quietly her own, not out of secrecy, but by design. She never married, and when asked why, her answer was never bitter or evasive. It was thoughtful, grounded, almost tender. She often said it went back to her mother. Watching Dorothy Hall dedicate her life to raising 4 children, Diane saw both the beauty and the sacrifice of that choice. She was the best mother, Diane once said, but I think that's why I didn't get married. I didn't want to give up my independence. Then, with her signature humor, she'd add, by the way, no one ever asked me to marry them either, so maybe that's the real reason. That mix of honesty and humor was exactly what made her so endearing. She didn't glamorize solitude or apologize for it. She simply lived it on her own terms. And when the time was right, long after Hollywood had decided women her age were supposed to fade, she did something else unexpected. In her 50s, Diane became a mother. She adopted her daughter Dexter first, then her son Duke. Suddenly, the woman who had built a life of independence found herself navigating bedtime stories and school recitals, worrying about scraped knees and teenage moods. The shocking thing, she once told Life magazine, is that I worry differently now. Before kids, if I worried, it was only about myself. But that's all you do as a parent, secretly worry without letting them see it. Motherhood didn't soften Diane. It deepened her. She still wore her hats, still cracked jokes about aging, still laughed that unmistakable laugh, but her perspective changed. The performer who once chased stage lights now found magic in the smallest moments. A sycamore tree outside her window, a walk through her garden, a Sunday morning coffee shared in silence. At this age, she told AARP magazine at 69, everything seems more astonishing. Like, oh my goodness, look at that tree! Why didn't I see that before? Her sense of wonder, that childlike awe of existence, never left her. It was what made her different from her peers, the ability to live sincerely in a world built on performance. She didn't define success by marriage or motherhood or awards, but by curiosity, by the ability to keep seeing the world as something new. And as she grew older, it was clear that independence hadn't kept her from love, it had simply taught her how to love more freely. Even in solitude, Diane Keaton made life feel full. She showed that you could stand alone and still be surrounded by meaning. And that quiet truth that wholeness doesn't depend on anyone else became her most personal masterpiece. When the news of her passing broke, it wasn't just Hollywood that went quiet, it was everyone who had ever laughed, cried, or found a piece of themselves in Diane Keaton. Tributes poured in from across generations, from icons who worked beside her to young artists who grew up watching her films. Jane Fonda called her a revelation who never needed to shout. Reese Witherspoon remembered her as a truly original person. Goldie Hawn said simply, "Yeah, Diane was the heartbeat of every set." And in a post that felt more like a love letter than a eulogy, Steve Martin wrote, "She didn't act like anyone else, and she didn't want to." That's why we all wanted to be like her. To the world, she was a 4-time Oscar nominee, a fashion trailblazer, and a comedy legend. But to those who truly knew her co-stars, friends, fans, she was something rarer, a woman who lived without pretense. Her signature look of vests, wide-brimmed hats, and layered suits wasn't a costume. It was armor and art all at once. She made individuality feel safe, even glamorous, and in doing so, she gave permission to millions, especially women, to show up in the world as themselves, unedited. Her influence went far beyond the screen. In a culture obsessed with reinvention, Diane's greatest power was her refusal to conform. She made imperfection magnetic. She laughed at awkwardness, celebrated age, and spoke about fear as though it were a friend. She reminded people that charm isn't about being flawless, it's about being honest. And that's something even time couldn't take away. You can still see her fingerprints everywhere in the confident humor of actresses like Emma Stone and Jennifer Lawrence, in the effortless cool of street style that echoes her Annie Hall silhouette, in every woman who dares to age with both grit and grace. She became a template not for imitation, but for liberation. In the end, Diane Keaton's story wasn't about fame or awards. It was about voice, the way she used hers to make people laugh, to make them think, and to make them feel seen. She once said she felt more comfortable living in the world of humor, but anyone who watched her work knew that humor was just how she told the truth. Her passing leaves a silence that feels too wide, but it's the kind of silence filled with echoes, laughter from Something's Gotta Give, quiet reflection from The Godfather, that nervous charm in Annie Hall. They linger, not as reminders of what's gone, but of what she gave. Diane Keaton didn't just act in movies, she rewrote how women could exist in them. And somewhere out there, someone's probably standing under a sycamore tree right now, looking up at the light through the branches and whispering her favorite line. Isn't this just astonishing? Even after her passing, Diane Keaton's presence feels impossible to replace. Her laughter, that unmistakable, slightly offbeat giggle, still echoes through living rooms whenever someone replays Annie Hall or Something's Gotta Give. It's the kind of sound that sticks in the air, familiar yet untouchable, like sunlight catching the edge of a hat she might have worn. Fans are already rewatching her interviews, marveling at how she could be both hilarious and profoundly sincere in the same breath. You never felt like she was performing, one fan wrote on X. She was just being. That's exactly why she mattered. She made authenticity look like art. You can feel her. Fingerprints on modern Hollywood, too. Every time a woman over 40 leads a romantic comedy, every time a performer leans into their quirks instead of hiding them, Diane's legacy flickers in the background. She opened doors that others didn't even know could be unlocked. Emma Thompson once said, "Diane proved that charm has no deadline." And it's true. She didn't just redefine what women could do on screen. She redefined when they could do it. Beyond the spotlight, she left behind 2 children who grounded her more than any award ever could. Dexter and Duke Keaton have stayed largely out of the public eye, but those who knew the family say Diane's home was a mix of order and chaos, kids' artwork hanging beside black and white photography, laughter echoing through hallways that smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. She was the kind of mother who worried in silence, one close friend recalled, but she also made everything feel like an adventure. Even her house, that now famous Spanish-style home in Beverly Hills, filled with art, books and hats, feels like a time capsule of her soul. Architectural Digest once called it a living museum of one woman's imagination. It's fitting. Diane didn't collect things. She collected stories. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every script she kept tucked away had meaning. But maybe the most remarkable thing she left behind wasn't physical at all. It was the feeling she gave people, the sense that life could be funny and fragile at the same time, that growing older didn't mean fading out, and that laughter could coexist with fear without canceling it out. She reminded her audience and herself that being human was messy, awkward, beautiful, and worth every second. So even now, as tributes fill timelines and clips play in endless loops, Diane Keaton isn't gone in the way people think. She's there in every woman who chooses authenticity over approval. She's in every man who learns that vulnerability isn't weakness. She's in every artist who believes the quiet truth inside them is enough. Hollywood may have lost a star, but the world didn't lose Diane Keaton. It just gained a little more reason to look at life with wonder and laugh at its absurdity while we still can.